George W. Bush, born July 6, 1946, New Haven, Connecticut, U.S., is the 43rd President of the United States, 2001-09, who led his country's response to the September 11 terrorist attacks in 2001 and initiated the Iraq War in 2003. Narrowly winning the Electoral College vote in 2000 over Vice Pres. Al Gore in one of the closest and most controversial elections in American history. George W. Bush became the first person since Benjamin Harrison in 1888 to be elected president despite having lost the nationwide popular vote. Before his election as president, Bush was a businessman and served as governor of Texas, 1995 to 2000. George W. Bush, America's 43rd president, 2001 to 2009, was transformed into a wartime president in the aftermath of the airborne terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, facing the greatest challenge of any president since Abraham Lincoln. The airborne terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the thwarted flight against the White House or Capitol on September 11, 2001, in which nearly 3,000 Americans were killed, transformed George W. Bush into a wartime president. The attacks put on hold many of Bush's hopes and plans, and Bush's father, George Bush, the 41st president, declared that his son faced the greatest challenge of any president since Abraham Lincoln. In response, Bush formed a new cabinet-level Department of Homeland Security, sent American forces into Afghanistan to break up the Taliban, a movement under Osama bin Laden that trained, financed and exported terrorist teams. The Taliban was successfully disrupted, but bin Laden was not captured and was still on the loose as Bush began his second term. Following the attacks, the president also recast the nation's intelligence gathering and analysis services, and ordered reform of the military forces to meet the new enemy. At the same time, he delivered major tax cuts which had been a campaign pledge. His most controversial act was the invasion of Iraq on the belief that Iraqi President Saddam Hussein posed a grave threat to the United States. Saddam was captured, but the disruption of Iraq and the killing of American servicemen and friendly Iraqis by insurgents became the challenge of Bush's government as he began his second term. President Bush pledged during his 2005 State of the Union address that the United States would help the Iraqi people establish a fully democratic government because the victory of freedom in Iraq would strengthen a new ally in the war on terror, bring hope to a troubled region, and lift a threat from the lives of future generations. Bush was born in New Haven, Connecticut while his father was attending Yale University after service in World War II. The family moved to Midland, Texas, where the senior Bush entered the oil exploration business. The son spent formative years there, attended Midland public schools, and formed friendships that stayed with him into the White House. Bush graduated from Yale, received a business degree from Harvard, and then returned to Midland where he too got into the oil business. In Midland he met and married Laura Welch, a teacher and librarian. They had twin daughters, Jenna and Barbara, now out of college and pursuing careers. When George W. Bush, at the age of 54, became the 43rd President of the United States, it was only the second time in American history that a president's son went on to the White House. John Quincy Adams, elected the sixth president in 1824, was the son of John Adams, the second president. While John Adams had groomed his son to be president, George Bush, the 41st president, insisted he was surprised when the eldest of his 6 children became interested in politics, became governor of Texas, and then went on to the White House. During the early part of the 2000 campaign for the White House, Bush enjoyed a double-digit lead in the polls over his opponent Vice President Al Gore Jr. But the gap closed as the election approached, and though Gore finally won the popular vote by 543,895 votes, victory or loss of the presidency hinged on Florida's electoral votes. That struggle through recounts and lawsuits worked its way to the Supreme Court. In the end, Bush won the electoral count 271 to 266. His new administration was focused on compassionate conservatism, which embraced excellence in education, tax relief, and volunteerism among faith-based and community organizations. Bush was challenged in his re-election bid in 2004 by Massachusetts Democratic Senator John Kerry. The election was a good contest, but Bush's contention that the invasion of Iraq had made the world more secure against terrorism won the national political debate. Bush was re-elected with 51% to 48%. On the inaugural stand, George W. Bush set the theme for his second term. At this second gathering, our duties are defined not by the words I use, but by the history we have seen together. For half a century, America defended our own freedom by standing watch on distant borders. After the shipwreck of communism came years of relative quiet, and then there came a day of fire. There is only one force of history that can break the reign of hatred and resentment, and expose the pretensions of tyrants, and reward the hopes of the decent and tolerant, and that is the force of human freedom. Tested but not weary, we are ready for the greatest achievements in the history of freedom. On July 6, 1946, George Walker Bush, the son of 41st U.S. President George Herbert Walker Bush, is born in New Haven, Connecticut. George W. Bush went on to become the 43rd U.S. President. When he was 2 years old, Bush's parents moved to Texas, where the elder Bush worked in the oil industry. Bush was nicknamed WBA for his middle name, which began with the letter W, and as a way to distinguish him from his father, who was also named George. He graduated from Yale University in 1968, after which he served in the Texas Air National Guard as an F-102 fighter pilot. In 1975, Bush obtained his MBA from Harvard University and followed his father into the lucrative oil business. He worked on the senior Bush's successful presidential campaign of 1988, as well as the ill-fated one in 1992, became part owner of the Texas Rangers baseball team in 1989 and became governor of Texas in 1994, a position he held for 6 years. George W. Bush ran for the presidency as a compassionate conservative Republican in 1999. Bush lost the popular vote but narrowly beat Democrat Vice President Al Gore in an election that hinged on close vote counts in several Florida counties. Gore filed a lawsuit contesting the results, but a month later the Supreme Court, in a controversial decision, declared Bush the winner, making him the 43rd President of the United States. Bush revived a conservative political agenda similar to that advanced by both his father's and Ronald Reagan's administrations, and even appointed key advisors from both Bush Sr.'s and Reagan's administrations to his cabinet. Bush appointed the first black Secretary of State, the well-known and respected former Gulf War general, Colin Powell. Just 9 months into his administration, Bush faced a tragic and unprecedented challenge to his presidency and to America's national security. On September 11, 2001, terrorists hijacked commercial jets and flew them into the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., killing close to 3,000 people in what was the worst attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor in 1941. Immediately, Bush launched the so-called War on Terror, in which he would seek, but not wait for, international cooperation in rooting out terrorist networks in the Middle East and South Asia, beginning with Al-Qaeda headquarters in Afghanistan. In 2003, Bush extended the War on Terror to include an invasion of Iraq, based on faulty evidence that Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein, who had attempted to assassinate Bush's father in 1992, was secretly building weapons of mass destruction in violation of a UN agreement. In December 2003, Hussein was captured by U.S. troops and was executed 3 years later. At the time of Bush's second inauguration in 2004, U.S. military forces and a handful of allies, including the United Kingdom, remained in Iraq in an attempt to help rebuild the country and establish a viable democratic government. In 2011, after Bush left office, the U.S. formally declared an end to the Iraq War, though active duty troops still remain. Bush left office in January 2009, after the election of Barack Obama. American politician and businessman who served as the 43rd President of the United States from 2001 to 2009. A member of the Bush family and the Republican Party, he was the 46th governor of Texas from 1995 to 2000. The eldest son of the 41st president, George H. W. Bush, he flew warplanes in the Texas Air National Guard in his 20s. After graduating from Harvard Business School in 1975, he worked in the oil industry. He later co-owned the Texas Rangers, of Major League Baseball, before being elected governor of Texas in 1994. As governor, Bush successfully sponsored legislation for tort reform, increased education funding, set higher standards for schools, and reformed the criminal justice system. He also helped make Texas the leading producer of wind-generated electricity in the United States. In the 2000 presidential election, he won over Democratic incumbent Vice President Al Gore, while losing the popular vote after a narrow and contested electoral college win, which involved a Supreme Court decision to stop a recount in Florida. In his first term, Bush signed a major tax cut program and an education reform bill, the No Child Left Behind Act. He pushed for socially conservative efforts such as the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act and faith-based initiatives. He also initiated the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, in 2003, to address the AIDS epidemic. The terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001 decisively reshaped his administration, resulting in the start of the War on Terror and the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. Bush ordered the invasion of Afghanistan in an effort to overthrow the Taliban, destroy al-Qaeda, and capture Osama bin Laden. He signed the Patriot Act to authorize surveillance of suspected terrorists. He also ordered the 2003 invasion of Iraq to overthrow Saddam Hussein's regime on the false belief that they possessed weapons of mass destruction and had ties with al-Qaeda. Bush later signed the Medicare Modernization Act, which created Medicare Part D. In 2004, Bush was re-elected president in a close race, beating Democratic opponent John Kerry and winning the popular vote. During his second term, Bush made free trade agreements. He appointed John Roberts and Samuel Alito to the Supreme Court. He sought major changes to Social Security and immigration laws, but both efforts failed in Congress. Bush was widely criticized for his administration's handling of Hurricane Katrina and revelations of torture against detainees at Abu Ghraib. Amid his unpopularity, the Democrats regained control of Congress in the 2006 elections. The Afghanistan and Iraq wars continued. In January 2007, Bush launched a surge of troops in Iraq. By December, the U.S. entered the Great Recession, prompting the Bush administration to get congressional approval for economic programs intended to preserve the country's financial system, including the Troubled Asset Relief Program. After his second term, Bush returned to Texas, where he has maintained a low public profile. At various points in his presidency, he was among both the most popular and the most unpopular presidents in U.S. history. He received the highest recorded approval ratings in the wake of the September 11 attacks, and one of the lowest ratings during the 2007 to 2008 financial crisis. Bush initially left office as one of the most unpopular U.S. presidents, but public opinion of him has improved since then. Scholars and historians rank Bush in the lower half of presidents. Bush attended public schools in Midland, Texas, until the family moved to Houston after he had completed 7th grade. He then spent 2 years at the Kincaid School, a college preparatory school in Piney Point Village, Texas. Bush later attended Phillips Academy, a boarding school in Andover, Massachusetts, where he played baseball and was the head cheerleader during his senior year. He attended Yale University from 1964 to 1968, graduating with a Bachelor of Arts degree in history. During this time, he was a cheerleader and a member of the Delta Kappa Epsilon, serving as the president of the fraternity during his senior year. Bush became a member of the Skull and Bones Society as a senior. Bush was a rugby union player and was on Yale's first 15. He characterized himself as an average student. His grade point average during his first 3 years at Yale was 77, and he had a similar average under a non-numerical rating system in his final year. In the fall of 1973, Bush entered Harvard Business School. He graduated in 1975 with an MBA degree, and is the only U.S. president to have earned an MBA. Bush was engaged to Catherine Lee Wolfman in 1967, but the engagement did not last. Bush and Wolfman remained on good terms after the end of the relationship. While Bush was at a backyard barbecue in 1977, friends introduced him to Laura Welch, a schoolteacher and librarian. After a 3-month courtship, she accepted his marriage proposal and they wed on November 5 of that year. The couple settled in Midland, Texas. Bush left his family's Episcopal church to join his wife's United Methodist Church. On November 25, 1981, Laura Bush gave birth to fraternal twin daughters, Barbara and Jenna. Bush describes being challenged by Billy Graham to consider faith in Jesus Christ as the risen Lord, how he began to read the Bible daily, surrendering to the Almighty, that faith is a walk and that he was moved by God's love. Before his marriage, Bush repeatedly abused alcohol. On September 4, 1976, he was pulled over near his family's summer home in Kennebunkport, Maine, for driving under the influence of alcohol. He was arrested for DUI, was fined $150, and received a brief suspension of his Maine driver's license. Bush said that his wife has had a stabilizing effect on his life, and he attributes his decision to give up alcohol in 1986 to her influence. While governor of Texas, Bush said of his wife, "I saw an elegant, beautiful woman who turned out not only to be elegant and beautiful, but very smart and willing to put up with my rough edges, and I must confess has smoothed them off over time." Bush also says that his faith in God was critical in abstaining. "I believe that God helped open my eyes, which were closing because of booze." Bush has been an avid reader throughout his adult life, preferring biographies and histories. 24 During his presidency, Bush read the Bible daily, though at the end of his second term he said on television that he is not a literalist about Bible interpretation. Walt Harrington, a journalist, recalled seeing books by John Fowles, F. Scott Fitzgerald, James Joyce, and Gore Vidal lying about, as well as biographies of Willa Cather and Queen Victoria in his home when Bush was a Texas oil man. Other activities include cigar smoking and golf. Bush has also painted many paintings. One of his best-known projects is a collection of 43 paintings of immigrants, titled Out of Many, 1. Another painting project was Portraits of Courage, a commander-in-chief's tribute to America's warrior. In May 1968, Bush was commissioned into the Texas Air National Guard. After 2 years of training in active duty service, he was assigned to Houston, flying Convair F-102s with the 147th Reconnaissance Wing out of Ellington Field Joint Reserve Base. Critics, including former Democratic National Committee Chairman Terry McAuliffe, have alleged that Bush was favorably treated due to his father's political standing as a member of the House of Representatives, citing his selection as a pilot despite his low pilot aptitude test scores and his irregular attendance. In June 2005, the Department of Defense released all the records of Bush's Texas Air National Guard service, which remain in its official archives. In late 1972 and early 1973, he drilled with the 187th Fighter Wing of the Alabama Air National Guard. He had moved to Montgomery, Alabama, to work on the unsuccessful U.S. Senate campaign of Republican Winton M. Blount. In 1972, Bush was suspended from flying for failure to take a scheduled physical exam. He was honorably discharged from the Air Force Reserve on November 21, 1974. Bush remains the most recent president to have served in the military. In 1977, Bush established Arbusto Energy, a small oil exploration company, which began operations in 1978. He later changed the name to Bush Exploration. In 1984, his company merged with the larger Spectrum 7, and Bush became chairman. The company was hurt by decreased oil prices, and it folded into Harken Energy Corporation, with Bush becoming a member of Harken's board of directors. Questions of possible insider trading involving Harken arose, but a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation concluded that the information Bush had at the time of his stock sale was not sufficient to constitute insider trading. In April 1989, Bush arranged for a group of investors to purchase a controlling interest of Major League Baseball's Texas Rangers for $89 million and invested $500,000 himself to start. He then was managing general partner for 5 years. He actively led the team's projects and regularly attended its games, often choosing to sit in the open stands with fans. Bush's sale of his shares in the Rangers in 1998 brought him over $15 million from his initial $800,000 investment. In the early or mid-1990s, before his gubernatorial campaign, Bush briefly considered a candidacy to become the commissioner of baseball. In 1978, Bush ran for the U.S. House of Representatives from Texas's 19th Congressional District. The retiring member, George H. Mahone, had held the district for the Democratic Party since 1935. Bush's opponent, Kent Hance, portrayed him as out of touch with rural Texans, and Bush lost the election, receiving 46.8% of the vote to Hance's 53.2%. Bush and his family moved to Washington, D.C., in 1988 to work on his father's campaign for the U.S. presidency. He was a campaign advisor and liaison to the media, and assisted his father by campaigning across the country. In December 1991, Bush was one of 7 people named by his father to run his father's 1992 presidential re-election campaign as a campaign advisor. The previous month, his father had asked him to tell White House Chief of Staff John H. Sununu to resign. Bush declared his candidacy for the 1994 Texas gubernatorial election at the same time his brother Jeb sought the governorship in Florida. His campaign focused on 4 themes: welfare reform, tort reform, crime reduction, and education improvement. Bush's campaign advisors were Karen Hughes, Joe Albaugh, and Karl Rove. After easily winning the Republican primary, Bush faced popular Democratic incumbent Governor Ann Richards. In the course of the campaign, Bush pledged to sign a bill allowing Texans to obtain permits to carry concealed weapons. Richards had vetoed the bill, but Bush signed it into law after he became governor. According to The Atlantic, the race featured a rumor that she was a lesbian, along with a rare instance of such a tactics making it into the public record, when a regional chairman of the Bush campaign allowed himself, perhaps inadvertently, to be quoted criticizing Richards for appointing avowed homosexual activists to state jobs. The Atlantic, and others, connected the lesbian rumor to Karl Rove, but Rove denied being involved. Bush won the general election with 53.5% of the vote against Richards' 45.9%. Bush used a budget surplus to push through Texas's largest tax cut, $2 billion. He extended government funding for organizations providing education on the dangers of alcohol and drug use and abuse, and helping to reduce domestic violence. His administration lowered the age at which juveniles can be sent to adult court for serious crimes to 14. Bush presided over 152 executions, more than any previous governor in modern American history. Critics such as Helen Prejean argue that he failed to give serious consideration to clemency requests. Critics also contended that during his tenure, Texas ranked near the bottom in environmental evaluations. Supporters pointed to his efforts to raise the salaries of teachers and improve educational test scores. In 1999, Bush signed a law that required electric retailers to buy a certain amount of energy from renewable sources, RPs, which helped Texas eventually become the leading producer of wind-powered electricity in the U.S. In 1998, Bush won re-election with a record 68% of the vote. He became the first governor in Texas history to be elected to 2 consecutive 4-year terms. During his second term, Bush promoted faith-based organizations and enjoyed high approval ratings, which ranged between 62 and 81%. He proclaimed June 10, 2000, to be Jesus Day in Texas, a day on which he urged all Texans to answer the call to serve those in need. Throughout Bush's first term, he was the focus of national attention as a potential future presidential candidate. Following his re-election, speculation soared, and within a year he decided to seek the 2000 Republican presidential nomination. After the inauguration of Barack Obama, Bush and his family flew from Andrews Air Force Base to a homecoming celebration in Midland, Texas, and then they returned to their ranch in Crawford, Texas. They bought a home in the Preston Hollow neighborhood of Dallas where they live. Bush made regular appearances at various events throughout the Dallas-Fort Worth area, including the opening coin toss at the Dallas Cowboys' first game in the new Cowboys Stadium in Arlington and an April 2009 Texas Rangers game, where he thanked the people of Dallas for helping him settle in, which was met with a standing ovation. He also attended every home playoff game during the Rangers' 2010 season and, accompanied by his father, threw out the ceremonial first pitch at the Rangers ballpark in Arlington for Game 4 of the 2010 World Series on October 31. He also threw the first pitch in Game 1 of the 2023 World Series. On August 6, 2013, Bush was successfully treated for a coronary artery blockage with a stent. The blockage had been found during an annual medical examination. In reaction to the 2016 shooting of Dallas police officers, Bush said, "Laura and I are heartbroken by the heinous acts of violence in our city last night. Murdering the innocent is always evil, never more so than when the lives taken belong to those who protect our families and communities." Thank you for watching this video.